How's it going, everybody? I'm Evo of the Lineman Lounge, and today I'm coming to you with another episode of our short series where we're going over all 32 teams in the NFL offseason and leading into that offseason for most of the teams. Because as the 2023 season wraps up, it's time for 30 of the NFL's other teams, but realistically 32 teams, and their fan bases to start looking forward to their next seasons. With the majority of the league starting their de facto offseason, it's a good opportunity for us to take a quick look and a concise look at every franchise and where they're heading at into the offseason. A lot of casual fans will give their opinions on moves that they think their team should make, signing player X to player or team Y. But it's a lot more than that. There's a lot more complicated. Cap room goes uh, into that equation. You have different things like team fits and whatnot. And a lot of teams are dealing with cap issues and losing free agents. So uh, I've done the work for you. I've done the legwork. I've looked at all 32 teams, who their projected losses are going to be, cap, things like that. And I'm going to be going division by division, breaking down each team individually. And today I'm going to be looking at the NFC East and its off season. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into it. So NFC East, we're going to start off with the Philadelphia Eagles. Eagles had a good year record wise, 11-6 after going to the Super Bowl last year, but that record doesn't really tell the whole tale of things, especially how the end of the season went. This is a team that started off hot, 10-1, looking really good, and then something clicked, something switched, and it wasn't a good thing. They basically lost out the remaining part of the year, lost to good teams, lost to bad teams, and things just kind of fell apart. Offensively, PFF had them ranked as the sixth best offense and the 13th best defense. But realistically, I mean, that defense, especially the secondary, was decimated, tons of injuries, and a lot of dysfunction. And then that dysfunction started to trail off into the offensive side of the ball. So it really makes you question, where are the team leaders? Where's the coaching? And that's a big issue for me going into this offseason for the Eagles. So they limped into the playoffs, but were quickly kicked out by the Buccaneers. Sirianni, their head coach, is staying put after a lot of people thought that he might be ousted and that Mike Vrabel could be the easy fit to come in and try to fix that system. And honestly, that was something that I was banging the table for. If not Vrabel, somebody else. Sirianni doesn't have a ton of uh, really good coaching experience. I mean, this is easy for me to say because I'm not an NFL head coach or a college head coach or even a high school head coach or anything like that. I coach at any of those levels. But that being said, like, his resume when he was hired by the Eagles, I didn't think was very spectacular, but he was inheriting a good roster. And the Eagles, Howie Roseman, and their ownership group, they're quick to move on from coaches, even if they have good rosters, just from having bad seasons. And this seemed like a prime time to do that. And it would have been a smart thing to do because I don't think that Sirianni was really pulling that group together. Um, Sirianni's staying, but his coaching staff really isn't. There were some good coaches there, like Sean Desai, who they brought in this year to replace their defensive coordinator. I thought he was a good hire, but they kind of pulled the reins from him pretty quick, and maybe his scheme didn't fit well with them. But putting Matt Patricia in as the play caller, that was doomed to fail from the get go. They've since signed Vic Fangio to run their defense. Fangio and his defense have been known throughout the league as being, a 3-4 style aggressive defense. And he's done good things, but that traditional 3-4 Fangio style defense that he's been running is slowly starting to get picked apart in this league. I think schematically, it is a very good fit for some of the personnel in the Eagles defense. But that being said, without an influx of young personnel onto that defense, is going to be trouble. Kellen Moore was also brought in to coach the offense. Their offensive coordinator Johnson this year just did a terrible job with what they had. Like, the players that they had and the tools that they have on offense just weren't utilized to their full capacity. It's something that me and Mike have said all year through the show, is that the Eagles offense is okay, but they just don't seem to be firing on all cylinders, not operating at 100%. And something was just off there. And a lot of that goes from Shane Steichen leaving and becoming the head coach of the Colts, in my opinion. Now, Kellen Moore going in there is an interesting hire. Uh, he obviously, was looked at as a potential head coach when he was with the Cowboys, and things didn't go well there. Ended up going to the Chargers and was the OC there for the Chargers, and things really fell apart there. And you didn't really see anything special out of his offense. Now, a lot of players were injured there and whatnot, but the stuff that made people think like, hey, he could be a new up and coming young head coach just really wasn't there for him. So I don't know how well this is going to work. I think it'll probably be better than Brian Johnson's offense that he ran there, but I don't know if that's necessarily going to be as good of a fit as it could be. Definitely a offense more catered towards Sykin, a mobile quarterback style offense would have been smart. And I don't know who out there would have been really good for that. I'd like to say Eric Bieniemy would have been a slam dunk hire, but he's used to working with more of a prototypical passer, like a Mahomes, and you saw what he did with Sam Howell up in Washington, which we'll go over that here in a little bit. But um, either way, that's who they got this year, Kellen Moore. I'm not so sure. I mean, it's tough to be. Well, I mean, they seemed pretty much average despite being the sixth offense in the league. So I suppose they could get worse, but I don't expect that to completely happen. If anything, I think that they'll just be more average again, with the possibility of getting a little bit better. Um, Regardless, there's some sort of trouble going on in the locker room. You kind of saw that locker room fall apart throughout the year. A big part of it being AJ Brown, their star receiver that they traded for a couple years ago. I mean, he just was not utilized as well as he could have been this year, as was with everything on the offense. And I think a lot of the issues, the shortcomings with Jalen Hurts, because he does have some, were showing up. Lack of arm strength, things like that. They were really getting by in that tush push for a long time, which may or may not be ruled out this next league year. They also have Kelsey, their starting center. He's an emotional rock of that team. He's likely retiring. Some people are putting it at 50-50, but I mean, it really seems like it's his time. It's been a couple years in a row now that like, hey, am I going to retire? Am I going to not? Is Howie Roseman going to show up with a keg of beer and a shot for me type thing? I just don't know if that's the case. Like he's got a good podcast going with his brother. Brother could look at retiring too. I think that he's probably going to be looking forward to spending time with his family and whatnot. So my guess is that Kelsey is probably out. But yeah, going back to AJ Brown, I mean, he's been publicly on his social media going after the team, and going after his quarterback, which is never a good thing. Like that's kids, stay off social media if you're going to be a professional athlete, because you'll say things emotionally on there and get yourself in a heap of trouble. And that's kind of where they're at right now. If Brown isn't on this team next year, wide receiver quickly jumps up the list on their list of needs. But wide receiver is already kind of a need for them to an extent. Um, at the end of the day, though, their biggest needs circle around that defense and the absolutely terrible secondary, which is surprising because it feels like the Eagles every year draft really well, and they draft really well on the defensive side of the ball, but things just haven't been working out for them, especially in that secondary. The Eagles right now are sitting with 16.1 million in effective cap space, so it's not terrible. And they surely will make some more room there, so they can go out there and sign at least one big name or a couple role players. Uh, this year, they're expected to lose Jason Kelsey, who is a free agent, Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham, Marcus Mariota, running back DeAndre Swift, and linebacker Zach Cunningham. Now, these are all guys who get relatively decent amount of playing time, minus Marcus Mariota, who is, of course, a backup quarterback. But these guys also are aging out. I mean, we're not talking about young dudes here, in Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham, and even Jason Kelsey. And a lot of these losses, bigger names coming from the defensive side of the ball there. DeAndre Swift seems like a really smart idea to bring him back, because he had himself a pretty good year, better than what he had been having with the Lions. But we'll see if they're able to bring him back or not. Right now, the main team needs for the Eagles are cornerback, safety. They need some tackle help because Lane Johnson isn't getting any younger. Linebacker, edge rushers, interior offensive line, and then wide receiver. They do have 5 draft picks, so not a full slate of draft picks, and they're going to be picking 22nd. Now, this is a really good draft, especially for kind of what they're needing. If they're looking for defensive backs, there should absolutely be one of those top tier defensive backs waiting for them. Safety would be a little bit too early at 22, probably, but cornerback for sure. There should be several good options for them available at 22. Otherwise, they can go offensive tackle because this is just a loaded offensive tackle draft. Either way, they need to make a little bit more cap room. They need to add pieces on defense. And realistically, if they're able to calm the waters with AJ Brown and get that working for them, that takes a major need off the board for them, at least early on in the draft at wide receiver. If they're able to calm the waters there, the offense should be okay. Like you should be able to find a tackle or a guard in this draft because it's a pretty decent draft for offensive line. But really, they need to focus heavy on defense, specifically on that secondary, because that secondary was one of the worst in the NFL, especially towards the end of the year. And then we'll see if Sirianni or these new slates of coaches can bring an increased level of play. They should be competitive, should be at least a wild card team again this year. That being said, the NFC East is got some teams that are a little bit more up and coming or very competitive. I mean, this isn't the NFC East of a couple years ago where you weren't having any team get into the playoffs with a positive record. Um, there's some good teams here and some good outlooks for some of these teams going forward. With that, we're going to move over to the Dallas Cowboys. So, Cowboys are in a bit of a tough spot here. They have 22.8 million over the cap in expected effective cap space. After going 12 and 5, having a really good year, getting into the playoffs, being, a team that people expected to be able to make it a decent ways, they get shut down by the Packers, and that's telling. They have the fourth ranked offense, the fifth ranked defense, according to PFF. But they are losing a decent amount of guys through free agency. And realistically, they, after losing to, in my opinion, an overrated Packers team in the playoffs, it was their chance to fire Mike McCarthy. Like, there's no reason why you wouldn't, in my opinion. Dan Quinn was probably going to be gone until he had a terrible outing there against the Packers. And he did end up leaving now. So you're going to be looking at a new defensive coordinator. And then offensively, like Mike McCarthy was calling plays and things were going good for them during the regular season. But you get to the playoffs and it's the same sort of thing every year where they can get to the playoffs and then they just can't get over the hump. Things just don't operate. And maybe that's a McCarthyism. Maybe that's Dak Prescott. I don't know. But I've always thought Mike McCarthy is a coach that can get a team to be average to above average until it counts, and then they're just kind of coming off the rails. You had options there that, as a Cowboys fan, I would have been really excited about. Saban, Belichick, Vrabel, any of those guys would have been a Jerry type of guy. But obviously, they keep McCarthy, and Dan Quinn is gone. So they are currently interviewing defensive coordinators, including my former head coach, Mike Zimmer, who was a defensive coach there. They're familiar with him in Dallas. So I think that wouldn't be a bad fit and a good coming back to the league for Mike Zimmer. But with them currently negative in the cap, the Cowboys have a big decision to make with Dakota Prescott. He's on the last year of his deal. He has a $59.4 million cap hit this year and more dead money due the next year when he's not on the roster. He had a near MVP style season through the regular season this year, but after faltering in the playoffs, the Cowboys need to decide if he's the long-term answer for this team or not. In reality, I'm assuming that they are going to extend him and push a lot of this money off in the future. That will help with their cap space and get them back in compliance. But if they let him just play out this contract, I mean, they're going to have to make some drastic cuts and some extensions, some re-signings that will help that cap space get a little bit better if they want to do anything in the offseason. That offensive line, which was amazing for Dallas several years ago, is just continuing to get older and older. And the defense is really boom or bust with those cornerbacks that they will give up a lot of passes, but they also will get you a lot of picks. And in some respects, that's a good thing. Like if you can absolutely win off of that. Turnovers are big. But they need to figure out something to, I don't know, get that defense a little bit more aggressive, make sure Micah Parsons doesn't disappear again like he did in the playoffs, because you can't be having your best defensive player just not really show up in the playoffs. I mean, that's a big problem. And if Mike Zimmer goes there, I'm pretty sure he'll figure that out. They also have kind of a dearth of running attack. This is a Dallas team where you see Emmitt Smith and then Zeke Elliott, and they've had really good running backs. And this year, Tony Pollard was retained to be the guy, and Zeke was, shipped out. And Pollard is a good running back, but I don't think that he's a bell cow guy. And he kind of showed that this year. And as of right now, he's not even going to be on this roster. So right now, pending free agents, Tyron Smith is expected to be a free agent. And he's getting older. I mean, he's been a stalwart on the left side of that line, but he's expected to be a free agent. He'll be a pricey guy to bring back. Tony Pollard is expected to be a free agent. Stephon Gilmore at quarterback, J-Ron Kearse at safety, Jordan Lewis at cornerback, defensive end Dante Fowler, Tyner Biadasz at center, Jonathan Hankins at defensive tackle, and cornerback Noah Igbenogany. Hopefully I said that right. But they're losing a bunch of that secondary guys that are starters, consistent starters for them, are going to be leaving. And then that big piece in Tyron Smith. I feel like Dallas has got a pretty damn good passing game right now. That being said, they need to restructure that offensive line and get some running help there. And there's a lot of solid free agent options at running back. And I feel like Jerry will find a way to shell out and get someone there who is going to kind of revitalize that running game to give them a good 1-2 punch on offense. And then the defense, if it stays how it is, you're all right. A good defensive coordinator like a Zimmer could provide a bit of an uplift. Do they need to bring people in on defense? Yes, but I think that the priority with this Cowboys team is going to be the offense and making sure that they can outscore the other team, worst case. Right now, the team needs are at offensive tackle, cornerback, wide receiver to get a third option out there, interior offensive line, running back, linebacker, and safety. So a lot of those defensive positions are of need, but I feel like this team is going to stick focusing on the offense. Probably will re-sign Dakota Prescott and try to just make this a bit of a glass cannon team. Big boomer bust. Dallas is picking at pick number 24 in the first round, but just like the Eagles, they only have 5 total picks in the draft. And being negative in the cap space, it makes it tough in the offseason to try to retain some of those main players and find your way into drafting, not just for best player available, but for need. So where they're picking, they could definitely get a defensive back, they could get a wide receiver, or they could probably get an offensive tackle or offensive lineman if they want to. That's the good news for them, is that at pick 24, there's a solid amount of options for them. The big thing for the Cowboys this offseason is just deciding what they're going to do with Dak Prescott's contract and structuring the team around him from there, or around that decision from there, I should say. Don't be surprised if they don't extend him. That Dallas could be a sneaky player there in the end of the first round to try and pick up one of those later first round style quarterbacks, a JJ McCarthy, a Bo Nix, or a Michael Penix. All right. Next, we're going to go to the New York Giants. So this is a Giants team that won a playoff game last year against my Vikings, but I felt like they were overrated then, and they kind of showed their true colors this year. Daniel Jones, Danny Dimes is not the answer. They went 6-11, and Danny Dimes went out with injury, and it was Tyrod Taylor. It was, the Guido himself out there playing quarterback. But obviously quarterback is a big problem for them, and something that they need to fix. The problem is that they did sign Daniel Jones to that contract, a bigger contract, but they're still in a position where it's like, hey, if he's not the guy you want to move on, it's all right to do that. This is the year after this year that they can realistically get out of that contract without much pain. But Danny Dimes is not the guy. And now the question is, at pick 6, which they have the 6th pick in the first round, are they going to be able to get one of those top 3 quarterbacks? Or are they going to be forced to focus on rebuilding their team in other ways? And I think that the latter is probably more likely what's going to happen. So Giants were 6-11 this last season. They got a couple big emotional wins against some teams. DeVito goes out there and beats the Packers, which I absolutely loved. Offensively, though, they were ranked 31st. Defensively, they were ranked 26th. The team absolutely needs to find wide receiver help. I mean, a quarterback would be nice too, but they're in a tough spot where it could be difficult to find their way to a quarterback. They also need some offensive line help. Evan Neal has not looked like a first-round pick, even though he's taken there. And I think the team will probably try to give him at least one more shot. But don't be surprised if they look at offensive tackle there with their first overall pick, even though wide receiver, I think, is your biggest boom or bang for your buck there at pick number 6. They also use some edge rush and interior offensive line help, and overall on the defense, a slew of guys. But this team, especially with Daboll as the head coach, you can expect them to be offensive heavy, especially through the draft, where they have 7 total picks. Um, this is a big year for Brian Daboll, though. Like Dable was seemed like a fantastic hire. I mean, got them to the playoffs last year, and then this year things just kind of fell apart. I mean, the relationship between defensive coordinator Wink Martindale and Brian Dable, you saw that through the middle of the year really start to erode. People respect Wink Martindale. He is a hard nosed guy, and I think he was just tired of not getting the respect or whatever it was out there in New York, and he fucking bugged out. Like he's over with it. So Dable is still there, but Wink Martindale is out. The Giants, they unfortunately don't have a ton of cap room as of right now to re-sign some of the big pieces that they could be losing this year. They have an expected 14.2 million in effective cap space, which obviously some of that can, each of these teams are going to be able to get themselves some extra cap space, but they don't have a ton as of right now. The problem is that pending free agents, they're losing cornerback Adoree Jackson, running back Saquon Barkley, quarterback Tyrod Taylor, linebacker Isaiah Simmons, who they just traded for this year from the Cardinals, defensive lineman Ashawn Robinson, defensive tackle Raheem Nunez-Roches, safety Xavier McKinney, and defensive end Jahan Ward. Now, those are a bunch of defensive guys that are starters for them. And so you would think, hey, they need to really focus on defense. Well, this team showed that they could win some games with that defense. They're losing guys, but they need to fix that offense. You can build a team a couple different ways. You can focus on one side of the ball, or you can focus on just getting the best players. And being that Daboll's that offensive guy there, I think he's going to try to go out and get a quarterback for himself at some point and build around it. It's just I don't know if they're going to have the ability to pick 6. But that's not terrible. They have the opportunity to get one of the top offensive talents. Brock Bowers at tight end is probably not going to happen because they already have a tight end on the roster. But I wouldn't be surprised if he's riding just because he's such a talent. You also have Malik Neighbors or Roma Dunze, both top flight wide receivers that could fit in really well there with that team. So hopefully they are able to shape things up there a little bit. But this is, I feel like, another 6-11 type of year that we're looking at for the Giants, unless they're really able to hit gangbusters on some of these on some of these picks in the draft, because I don't think they're going to be able to bring in a ton of talent through free agency when, especially, like, you've got to try to re-sign some of these guys, so you're not going to have a ton of cap space to go out and get free agents. The one guy, like, biggest name here obviously is Saquon Barkley. He's one of the better running backs in the league. I don't see any way that they're going to be able to retain him. He's going to be someone that is really sought after and wouldn't be a terrible option to jump over to Dallas. So that would probably really piss off some Giants fans. All right. And then last but not least, we have the Washington Commanders, who I've said it a couple times. I think one of the better opportunities to see a Texans-style turnaround in this league. One of the more enviable spots for head coaches, and somehow that didn't work out for them. So Washington Commanders, they finished the year 4-13, and not a great year. Offensively ranked 24th and defensively ranked 30th according to PFF. They need a quarterback, offensive tackle, edge rushers, tight end, interior offensive line, linebacker, cornerback. They need a lot. They traded away their 2 top edge rushers this year to get a whole bunch of extra draft capital, and they're picking 2nd overall with 8 total picks. And new head coach, new ownership group, Dan Quinn is now in there. Probably the worst head coaching hiring of this cycle. That being said, Dan Quinn has had success in other places, and he's got a deep Rolodex of coaches that can come in and coach for him. Actually, just before recording this, Cliff Kingsbury was hired as the offensive coordinator there for Washington. And Kingsbury was a coach for Caleb Williams at USC. Caleb Williams is from the DC area. He makes perfect sense to go to Washington. The question is, can Washington get him with the Bears picking at pick number 1? There's been a lot of scuttlebutt about Caleb Williams not wanting to go to the Bears, and then he has kind of countered it. We'll see. I don't know. It just makes so much sense for Washington to go out there and get Caleb Williams. If not, Drake May is a great pick as well. Like, he looks like he's a Justin Herbert-esque style quarterback. So that could be really good for them. The sad thing is that Eric Bieniemy is out the door. Won't be the offensive coordinator there anymore. Someone will be super happy to get Bieniemy though. If Andy Reid decides to step away, I wouldn't be surprised if Bieniemy were to go there and become the head coach, because he showed that like the one thing that kind of was able to work on this offense was their passing game. Sam Howell has an arm. I think he is a solid backup quarterback at the very least. Like he's showed that he can go out there and start games. He got thrust into the shit without a lot of preparation and did well for what he was asked to do as a later round pick. Because they are probably going to be taking a quarterback with that second overall pick, don't be surprised if Sam Howell could become trade bait. I mean, if you are going after a big name guy, another team that needs a quarterback could go after Sam Howell as a bridge type of quarterback or someone to develop. I mean, he's someone that I would be interested in with my Vikings. I'll just say that. Um, I don't think he's a lost cause at all, but he will be probably relegated to backup duties if they don't actually move off of him and trade him. This team is set up though to have a good offseason with 8 picks. They have 62.5 million in cap space adjusted for effective cap. That's basically the most in the league. They can be hyper aggressive in free agency, and they absolutely should be. Now, they do have some pending free agents that I would consider bringing back. Right now, they're looking at wide receiver Curtis Samuels, cornerback Kendall Fuller, quarterback Jacoby Brissett, linebacker Cody Barton, running back Antonio Gibson, wide receiver Jamison Crowder, and linebacker Jabril Cox, all out the door as pending free agents. I would bring back a couple of those guys. I mean, Curtis Samuel's getting up there in age a little bit, but he's a good wide receiver for you, and they have a good wide receiver room there. Kendall Fuller was a good piece to that defense, which didn't have very many good pieces. Antonio Gibson probably walks because they've got Brian Robinson there, but Jameson Crowder probably walks as well. But some of these guys they could absolutely look at bringing back and still have plenty of cap space to play around with. They can go after some of the top talent at edge rusher, which would be a huge need taken off of their board, and possibly some offensive line help. And it's my true opinion that this team could have a top 15 offense given a new quarterback. I don't know about Kingsbury as the OC, but a new quarterback. They already have the receiver talent. They already have a running back. They need to bolster that offensive line, which was pretty terrible. But they'll have an opportunity to do that in this draft, which is kind of littered with good offensive linemen. They can go out there and sign a guy in free agency too to ease some of that burden. The defense, they were 30th, obviously, but what do you expect when you trade away your top 2 edge rushers? They'll be able to get better by bringing in some new guys, being aggressive with that cap space and free agency. And realistically, if that defense gets average, I mean, the offense has a chance to be, again, top 15 if they hit on a lot of their picks. So if Dallas and Philly don't kind of fix their issues, Washington could sneak into the conversation of fighting for maybe not the first spot in the NFC East, but absolutely a wild card spot and could be really pressuring some of these teams. So with that, that's a look at the NFC East offseason preview. Hopefully y'all like it. And I will get back to you here in the coming days with the rest of the NFL. Later.